Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Wednesday night once again. So tonight we're going to be talking about one of my absolute favorite bands. This is like top 3 for me. Of course, we're talking about Led Zeppelin, and we're going to be ranking the 9 Zeppelin studio records today. And when I had the idea for doing this, I thought, who better to come on and share the ranking and hear some different opinions than Pete Pardo and Martin Popoff. So let me bring those gentlemen in. And here's Martin. And here's Pete. How you guys doing?
Awesome. Very cool.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year, man. Yeah, we're into
I don't know how happy it is so far, but hey, a new year, right?
You shared some bad news right off the top, Pete. So you want to let the folks know what happened earlier?
Yeah, so unfortunately, everybody, we lost Tim Bogart a couple hours ago. So Tim, of course, the great legendary bass player from the Vanilla Fudge and Cactus and Beck Bogart in a piece. So I believe he was 76 years old. So I've reached out to Carmine a piece to get some, get some words from him. But yeah, a big loss. Great bass player and, a true rock and roll warrior. So he will be greatly missed. Yeah,
for sure. This year's not starting off well, man. It's it's just a continuation from the crappy 2020, I think. But anyways. So we're going to be talking about Led Zeppelin today. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining in. We got 29 folks in here as of yet. Thank you all so much for coming on board and checking out the show. So, but you know what? Before I get into the Zeppelin thing, and one thing I was thinking about earlier is, I mean, I mentioned there's like, for me, Zeppelin's like the top 3 band, right? How important do you think Zeppelin was in terms of an influence to like music thereafter? Because I look at them as one of the most influential bands. I'll say like them and the Beatles, but in different ways. What, if you guys were kind of to summarize, what do you think their impact was on future generations of bands? Martin, let's start with you. What do you think?
Wow. So, I mean, obviously there's the whole idea of, quote unquote, inventing heavy metal with the likes of Communication Breakdown and Good Times, Bad Times, taking the blues away from the British blues boom into something that's a little more interesting, taking us towards heavy metal, showing that creativity, the golden god with the singing and the long blonde tresses. You've got a guitar hero there, lots and lots of things. And then you've even got somewhat a template for the whole hair metal thing in the 80s. You could say it's Van Halen and Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin in a way provide that template for that music later. So it's a whole different tack from your Black Sabbaths and your Heaps. And I think there is that throughput through there. So many influences. And, we have talked about how, Beatles, massive influence. Kiss influenced a lot of rock stars. I've interviewed a lot of people who say, Kiss was a huge influence. But Zeppelin, out of all the guys we love and we talk about from the 70s and 80s, Zeppelin is the big band that inspired them the most, I think.
Yeah, like you wouldn't have Kiss without Zeppelin. I mean, Paul Stanley modeled himself like after Robert Plant. They had all the iconic things that weren't there originally. Like you mentioned, they had the guitar hero, and then they had that front man, and that whole band sort of, vision that really didn't really exist before Zeppelin. What do you think, Pete?
Highly influential, highly important, one of the biggest selling rock bands of all time. But I think what also is really important, you had, which the Beatles did as well, but you had these 4 guys, all virtuosos of what they did, all rock stars. I mean, Zeppelin were as well known for stuff that happened off stage as they were stuff that happened on stage and, what we heard on the records. So, four larger than life figures which proved to be true after Bonham died. You can't do this band without any of the pieces together, right? You take one out of the equation, it's not going to work. And I think that was really, really key. So, they stayed together throughout that whole decade. They conquered the world throughout that whole decade. And as soon as one of them was gone, that was it. And, we haven't seen that a lot in rock and roll history. I mean, what other band other than, we talked about Rush for all those years and ZZ Top. I mean, what other band had like that same lineup that just pretty much killed it from start to finish? And then once one of them was gone, that was the end of them. I mean, it's something that's very unique in rock and roll history. And yeah, like Martin said, musically speaking, absolutely. I mean, blues-based heavy rock. I mean, that's kind of the template for it right there, right?
Yeah, it's almost like there would be no 70s without Zeppelin, the 70s rock. And then it carried into the 80s. I mean, Van Halen. I mean, you get the front man, and then you get the virtuoso guitar player. It's like that recipe and even to this day, it's still ongoing, right? And then there's newer bands now that are just, I mean, Greta Van Fleet pops into my head that are just, again, going back to that same formula from 1969. It's amazing the influence these guys had, and we'll get into the other stuff with Page and his production and the arrangements and all that stuff, and the whole creating like just a guitar symphony. You know what I mean? But we'll get into all that stuff as we go through these records. So I don't know about you guys, but I had a hell of a time with this list. Reason being is it's Led Zeppelin. There's not a dud in the bunch. I mean, he can't say this album is crap. That's going to be the bottom. Like every record that they've made is phenomenal. I mean, there's so many highlights. It's more a matter of, for me anyway, it's more of what I've tired of hearing as opposed to this is no good. You know what I mean? It's ear fatigue. Is going to play a big role in my listing here. Well, what about you guys? Is there any obvious ones for you, or how difficult was it putting this list together for you?
Well, I think my number 1 and my number 9 were pretty easy. It's the ones in between. And, it's funny because before we went on the air, Hack and I were talking about, the fact that I did this whole exercise on Sea of Tranquility probably about a year ago. And I went back and rewatched that yesterday to see if what my mindset today, if it's exactly the same. And it was fairly close. I did make a couple, slight changes, but I think I still, if this is a band we've all been following for how many years now? A long time. And it's I think my opinion on some of these albums has changed over the years. And I'll talk about some of the ones that have really moved around in my rankings since I was a teenager. But I still, it's pretty consistent with the way I was feeling about a year ago. But like I said, it's I think my number 1 has been my number 1 forever. My number 9 has always been my number 9. But the others, they could kind of move around a little bit. They're all really good. I mean, they're either really good or great. That's kind of how I rank this catalog.
Again, it does. What about you, Martin? How hard was this for you?
My number 1 and my number 2 are really solid. And I thought it was really cool that you wanted to throw in Coda, because that's throwing in a wild card that is going to be hard to place in here possibly, right? But what I found really hard about this is Led Zeppelin fans are so touchy, right? And I've noticed that when I've done any sort of Led Zeppelin talk or interview or whatever, and I did this book, right? This where I had to go through every single song. This is basically the analysis of every Led Zeppelin song, and no interview stuff. It's just straight analysis. And so I had to examine this stuff in so much detail to do that thing. But I earlier today with our industry email group, I brought this up, and everybody started throwing in their rankings, and everybody started arguing and swearing, and people get really touchy about a Zeppelin ranking, and they really don't want to see our last slot or our second to last slot, because they're going to be arguing with us immediately. How dare you, crap on that album? It's well, we had to, because we're ranking them, right? They never understand that. It's really funny, but I have this theory that when there's a certain amount of drama and bad vibes in a band, it translates over to the fan base, and they feud a lot. They argue a lot. And Zeppelin fans really argue. Van Halen fans argue. Rush fans are actually really polite. It's all love and roses with Rush fans, no matter what you think. It's really funny. But and we noticed that with Accept fans recently. I've noticed, right? So so anytime there's some drama or some bad vibes or some reason, and Jimmy with the whole occult thing and all kinds of stuff that's gone on, we have a death in the band. People really, really argue about these lists, and they're usually not happy about them. They'll point out the negative thing, and so that's hard about this. It's really scary to do this list because you're in for some abuse.
Yeah, and two things I want to add. So first of all, Martin, if you could hold your book up again. I will tell anybody who has not checked that book out, that is one of my favorite books from Martin. It is absolutely gorgeous. If you are a Zeppelin fan, you have to have it. It's just an amazing book. There's so many great photographs and information in there. I've actually read that a couple times, and that's an amazing, amazing book that belongs in every Zeppelin fan household. Number two, I'm going to just say right now, and this is echoing Martin's point here, all of these albums are really good.
Yes.
And just because one or the other is at the bottom of the list does not mean we're trashing it, does not mean we don't like it. Because I got this big time when I did the ranking a year ago on Sea of Tranquil. It's like, how could you rank that album number 8 or number 7? It's like, I love the album. You got to put it somewhere, right? I just happen to like other ones a little bit more. And sometimes these are not separated by much of anything, right? We're talking maybe a song or two that tilts it in the favor of one over the other, right? Or maybe one album has half of the songs we're just, like Hack mentioned, we're just so tired of hearing. It's a great album, but I'd rather listen to other albums, so I'm going to rank them higher. So that's what makes this very difficult when you got a catalog that's so strong like this. You got to put it in some sort of order, right? Doesn't mean you don't like any of them.
Yeah, their worst record on their worst day is still better than pretty much anybody on their best
Absolutely.
day. You know what I mean? So the thing for me that was cool about this list is a lot of the rankings that I've done before, a lot of it had to do with timeline and where I was introduced to the band. I'm coming at Zeppelin very late. I didn't start listening to Led Zeppelin until I was in my 20s and playing guitar.
Wow.
And it was really more like me learning how to play guitar and getting into Jimmy Page and all that stuff. So I have no timeline bias. It's like, this is my first record I ever bought, so it's my favorite. I don't have any of that. So I'm looking at it strictly from an objectable point of view. So that's kind of cool. So I'm strictly going by, like the ear fatigue. Like the problem with Zeppelin, again, a lot of their stuff got played to death on the radio. There's certain Zeppelin songs I never need to hear again, except for one that I'll mention that's got a really nice solo. But apart from that, there's songs I never need to hear again. So a lot of that has to do with a lot of it. So
Martin, when did you start listening to Zeppelin? Like, where were they in their career when you started buying their albums?
It's funny. It literally was one of the first things I ever heard that was heavy. We talked about this, but for some reason I got it in the Columbia Record Club, and it was Steppenwolf and Creedence Clearwater Revival and Three Dog Night. And then a light bulb went off when I heard the first heavy thing. And one of the very first heavy things I ever heard was Led Zeppelin. I think it was 4. So 1971, I would have been 8, around that time. So I would say 71 or 72. And, it was never one of my favorite bands because as a kid, you want something a little more immediate and without the folk and with maybe even better recordings and stuff like that. Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Kiss, Aerosmith, Ted. That was probably more favorite almost through most of the 70s for me because Led Zeppelin was just a little bit different.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. For me, I mean, I was aware of them throughout like the mid 70s to the end of the decade, but I actually didn't buy my first Zeppelin album till Into the Outdoor came out. I bought that from the record shop when that came out. That was the first thing I bought, and that prompted me to go back and get all of the stuff. And then you blinked, and Bonham was dead, and they were done. So, that was kind of traumatic for me. You're getting into this band. They're so great. They announced that tour, and then Bonham dies, and it's like, the plug gets pulled up from under you. So that was kind of disheartening, but that's life, right?
Yeah. All right. So, let's get going here. We got 78 people in here. Thank you so much. Got a couple thumbs up on Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook, you're watching on YouTube. Thank you all so much for being here. All right, so let's start with Martin. Okay.
All right.
Again, let me just say, this is just They're all great, but they have to be in a specific order. Okay,
Yep.
so they're all great. All right.
Okay.
That being
So-
said, good work.
My number one is not Coda. And I'm going to plead a little bit of the guiltiness of exactly what you said, Hack. There's a little bit of what am I super sick of? I'm going to put a little of that in, but I'm not going to let that completely command my list. But it's caused Coda not to be at the bottom. So I'm going to go with Led Zeppelin, the first album. I'm going to go with this for the reason that I have tended to, over the last few years, nudge away from the very, very earliest albums of a lot of bands and really like the stuff from a little later in these master bands of the 70s. So I often tend to come in with a 75, 76, 77 sort of album. But the reason for Zeppelin being there is that it does sound like the oldest, just like Black Sabbath. It sounds just a little unrealized, a little bit disjointed, but I mean, obviously it was super important for so many people. Good Times, Bad Times was a great, heavy new song. Of course, we talked about Communication Breakdown, how important that is. But I could do without I Can't Quit You, Baby, and I could do without You Shook Me, right? Both covers, both just big, heavy blues things. I never liked any of that stuff. I don't care who's doing it. How many more times? A little depressing. But, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You is great folk. Dazed and Confused is kind of cool and doomy. But, yeah, I'm just going to put it there because it is kind of the oldest, the least realized out of all of them. So, and it is one of these that is, most of these songs you've heard many, many, many times. There you go. Number 9.
Right. So we're already getting comments of Martin's controversial number 9. Something had to be number 9, man. All right. What do you got, Pete, for number 9?
All right. Well, I'm going to kind of pick the obvious here. I'm going to go with Coda as my number 9. Again, I remember when this came out, we were all thinking, wow, they were able to squeeze something out, right? After they basically called it quits. And, I think it is what it is. It's like a collection of, as the Who would put it, odds and sods, right? And that's quite all right. I don't think there's anything on here that's, for me anyway, that's absolutely spectacular, but it's all really solid. We're going to groove. You got a live version of I Can't Quit You, Baby. Darlene is kind of fun. Poor Tom. I think it's got plenty to like. I just don't think that this is ever going to be confused with a great Zeppelin album, but as a nice little kind of thank you to the fans. We got some leftovers we're going to throw together for everybody that's so disappointed with kind of what happened. I was happy to have this. I still listen to it, like it, but to me, this is not comparable to all the other stuff, but it's still there's plenty to love on it, obviously. So that's my number 9.
Which again, them on their worst day is still better.
It's still good, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So great. All right, well, my number 9, and this is going to piss off a lot of people. This is Led Zeppelin 4, is my last one, and it's just ear fatigue. Ear fatigue, man. If it's been overplayed. I never need to hear rock and roll ever again, ever.
Right. I agree with you there.
Yeah, me
I
too.
agree with you on that one.
And the other one I never need to hear again is Stairway to Heaven. But I think I picked that as my favorite Jimmy Page solo album.
Didn't we both? Or no? I think mine was number 2. Yours was number 2.
And that was my number 1. Perfectly constructed solo. But again, it's like, so that it goes right back to what I said. None of these are bad. They're amazing records, and it is an amazing record. It's just it's been overplayed. I've heard it too many times. One song that isn't overplayed that I absolutely love that's on that record is Misty Mountain Hop. There's a song that you don't hear 100,000 times, but it's there's really, I mean, for me, I'm not a big fan of Four Sticks. That's the one. But apart from that, I mean, the album is stellar. If it wasn't played to death on the radio, it would be ranked way, way higher. But yeah, rock and roll, I don't know. I'm so, and the other thing is too, because I play in bands and stuff, and every time you go and jam, what's the first riff you hear? Hey guys, let's play rock and roll. It's like, no, don't need to play that ever again either. So it's just one of those songs. But I mean, again, if it wasn't played to death, it would be ranked much higher. But something had to be number 9, and for me, it's Zeppelin 4. So there you go.
Cool. All right.
All right. Go ahead, Martin. What do you got for number 8?
So my number 8, I went with Led Zeppelin 2. Pretty much for the exact same reason I went for Led Zeppelin 1, but I've always kind of had it in for this album. It's a little bit of my Black Sabbath Volume 4. I've always kind of had it in for Volume 4. It depresses me. It just kind of gets me down. It sounds like an overcast, bad weather sort of album. I never need to hear a whole lot of love again. Not a huge fan as What Is and What Should Never Be. Lemon Song, Thank You is okay, but it's not the greatest, most creative acoustic thing they've ever done. Heartbreaker, not crazy about it. Live and Love and Made, love it. It's a good headbanging modern metal classic. But I really find Moby Dick, it's not much of a kind of a drum showcase, and I don't like that big bluesy riff to the thing. So I don't know. It's obviously it's a super important album. This is the second album from 1969 from them. So before we get Sabbath doing anything, Deep Purple in rock, before we get Very Heavy, Very Humble, Zeppelin's in there with 2 records, and they're big records, and everybody's talking about Zeppelin, and it's pretty amazing that way. But I still find it very dated, just like the first one. I don't think it dates particularly well. It has a little bit of that kind of 60s hippie psychedelia to it. So I don't know. It's it's a combination of the reason you picked 4. It's a combination of the reason I picked 1. And yeah, just I've always had this album's been a little bit of an enemy to me always. So there you go. Number 8.
Interesting. All right. What do you got for number 8, Pete?
So of course Martin knew he was going to get my hackles up with that Volume 4 comment once again.
Right.
Anyway, my number 8 is In Through the Outdoor. This was, like I said, this was the first Led Zeppelin album that I actually went out and bought back when it first came out, and I like it. It's a little bit different. I mean, it's actually very different than the couple albums that came before it. Before we went on the air, we were talking a little bit about kind of the circumstances surrounding the band at this time. You know, Jimmy Page kind of like not doing his normal work with the band around this time. I mean, normally Jimmy's got his hands on everything, and you know, he was a little bit MIA. I mean, Jimmy was having a lot of personal issues, a lot of demons he was sorting out at the time. Yeah. So John Paul Jones kind of really stepped up, and this is more of a, you know, JPJ driven album than anything else. It's very melodic. It's got a lot of textures, a lot of colors. It's a really good album. You know, for those who like the heavier Zeppelin, this isn't really it, right?
Yeah.
But, In the Evening, great song. You know, Fool in the Rain is really different for them, but man, what a great guitar solo, what a great melody to that song, right? Great drum work on that. Carouselambra is pretty fantastic. I really dig that a lot. Some people don't like because it's too long, too many keyboards. I don't know, you know, I dig it, whatever. All of My Love, I remember, you know, when this album first came out, it was kind of cool to like that song. I don't really care for it as much nowadays, but I think it's a good album. It's really different for them. But if you want to almost listen to like easy listening Zeppelin, this kind of really does the trick for that. When I want to listen to more adventurous headbanging Zeppelin, I don't bother with this one at all. But, you know, I think out of all the regular albums, this is probably my least favorite, but there's a lot to really like on here. So, and then, you know, it has a certain charm, you know, packaging notwithstanding. I remember when this came out, I was like, what is this? It comes in a bag and it's good. There's no logo on it or anything like that. What the hell's going on here? But, you know, some really good stuff on here, I think.
I've never heard the term easy listening applied to Led Zeppelin, so it's like
it kind of is, though, right? You know,
in the context of their catalog, yeah, kind of it is, yeah. All right, this is gonna piss off a bunch of people too, but let's go for it. So my number 8 is Led Zeppelin 3. So you know, everybody talks about this being the acoustic record, but I mean, you got an Immigrant Song on this, Celebration Day. And Since I've Been Loving You. And one thing I do like about Zeppelin is, and I'll talk about this more later, is I love it when they just strip it down and play straight blues. It's amazing. You know, whether or not they've ripped it off or not, it sounds great. So, but you know, again, this is a thing where, you know, the problem with Zeppelin is like there's too many great songs. And this contains a lot of them, but there's other records that they have that there are more songs that I like on them. So the only song on this that I'm not a big fan of is Hats Off to Roy Hooper. And I don't know why it's described so much as an acoustic record, because there's a fair amount of electric guitar on this record too. Again, it's a fantastic record. I got no problems with the record whatsoever. It's just there are other albums that have more songs that I like on them. So, but this does not suffer from as much overplay as, say, Zeppelin 4 for me anyway. But yeah, that's my number 8.
Cool.
All right. Okay.
All right. So my number 7. I know it had to come in here pretty quick, didn't it? So it's not I've got two above it or 2 below it. Love Coda to death. Out of the last 15 years, I'd say this is the Led Zeppelin album I play the most. I'm not sick of it really yet. The negatives are I Can't Quit You Baby. I don't need that. I don't need Bonzo's Montreux, but everything else on this I think is just awesome. Ozone Baby, Darlene, and Wearing and Tearing. So you get the 3 songs that would have made In Through the Outdoor heavier. And they're not particularly heavy. Wearing and Tearing's pretty heavy, but the other 2 are just really charming, cool, hard rocking Zeppelin songs where Jimmy Page isn't as checked out as he is on the rest of the album. We're Gonna Groove, it's talked about as a studio track, or basically the credits kind of leave out the fact that it's a live track with the crowd taken out of it. Walter's Walk is like a Houses of the Holy outtake, but they sneakily, they're like this with the credits. It's one thing that people don't like about Zeppelin, but that's the one where they added a Robert vocal on in 1982 onto this 1972 song. But I still love it. It's great. So yeah, and Poor Tom is amazing, super charming song. It's a little short at just 8 songs. It would have been nice if there were a little more to it. Inside you get the gatefold of the band shots, and then you get the mysterious those things on the back. But yeah, I just find it very listenable, good. I love how it gives you a different take of what In Through the Outdoor could have been. Good variety on it. Like I say, I could do without I Can't Quit You Baby and Bonzo's Mantra. They don't really fit the theme of the record, but yeah, like this album a lot. So there it is. Beat out 2 regular Zeppelin albums for me. Number 7.
Cool. Interesting. All right, Pete, what do you have for 7?
All right. Well, it almost pains me to put this one at number 7 because I really like this album a lot. But I'm going to go with Presence.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, exactly. It's got some songs that I absolutely love on here. I mean, Achilles' Last Stand, one of their best songs ever, I think. Nobody's Fault But Mine. Totally love that. Hot Song for Nowhere. T for One is another one of those great, blues songs that they do. Some killer guitar work on there. For Your Life, another great song. I mean, I really dig it, and it just kind of pains me to put it here. But
some had to be 7.
something had to be 7, and I think I like the other ones just a little bit better, right? But I will say there's a couple tracks on here that are among some of their best, I think. And I always thought the album cover is just weirdly cool, and there's all this mystery surrounding this album cover, and that what do they call this thing again?
Obelisk or something?
Obelisk, that's right. Yeah,
no, The Object. It's just called The Object.
Oh, The Object. Okay, The Object. Yeah, whatever. It's weird. It's kind of bizarre, and nobody ever really knew what the hell it was supposed to be. But I think this is a really great album for Plant. I think he sounds fantastic on this album. I mean, the whole band sounds great on here, obviously. But Achilles' Last Stand, what a kick off an album track, I think, and easily one of their heaviest songs, and it's quite progressive too in the way the arrangement is set up. So, really good album. Again, I know it's number 7. What are you going to do? Something had to be there.
Exactly. Something had to be 7. So, Martin, you and I are the same with number 7. I'm going with Coda.
Okay.
You know what? I love the songs on this record. The songs are great. It's almost like it's odds and sods, but it's also like a retrospective in that regard, right? Because you've got, We're Gonna Groove. You got songs from kind of different eras of the band. And there's one song on that record that I absolutely love, and the only way you'll ever hear it is on that record. And I love Darlene. I absolutely love
Darlene's fun. Yeah,
it's great. I mean, I love when it it's about 2/3 of the way through, and it just the whole song just turns into this rockabilly thing. And there's Plant doing his best Elvis Presley impression. I got my pink carnation and all. I just love that song. It's so cool. Um, Ozone Baby, also a great tune. I love when they do blues, so I Can't Quit You Baby for me is right up there. When they do straight ahead blues, Page for me is one of the best blues guitar players out there. So any blues, since I've been loving you or Can't Quit You, anything along those lines, when they're playing straight blues stripped down, I'm it's an out of body thing for me. I absolutely love it. So, it just, and the thing is, it did not get played to death. Ozone Baby, you don't hear it on the radio. You don't hear these songs on the radio. So, yeah, Bonzo's Montreux, yeah, I'll give you that. But the songs that are on there are really good. It's a record that, yeah, I go back to, because it's so different than everything else, right? And you were talking earlier about the production. The one thing that about Zeppelin records is they are, to my ears anyway, all very, very well produced, and arrangement wise, like Jimmy Page is a phenomenal arranger, producer, composer. He's all of that, and that's why all their albums sort of fit that certain quality, because I know, like, if you listen to any bands from that era, there's not a lot of bands that sound as good as Zeppelin on vinyl. Like, there just aren't. There's bands that, I'll mention Kiss, because that's their whole thing. How come we don't sound like Zeppelin? Okay, Mike, you can't play like Zeppelin. But I mean, production wise, you know what I mean? Like, it didn't matter who they put in the producer's chair, Bob Ezrin, Eddie Kramer, they could never sound as good. Even Eddie Kramer, who produced Zeppelin, they could still never have those sonics. It's just, their records sound fantastic. They, for me anyway, they stand the test of time, for sure.
I absolutely agree. And let's give some props to them for, on almost every one of these albums, there's so much variety.
Oh yeah,
I love Kiss too, but a lot of those classic Kiss albums, you know what you're getting from track 1 through 9, right? Or
right.
1 through 10. With Zeppelin, it's like every song is something completely different than what came before. Here's a little folk, here's a little blues, here's some hard rock. They do a little bit of everything, and that's what made them so great.
Yeah, well, Jimmy Page said it, man. Like, our body of work is like a textbook, and there's so much to it, like so many influences. They started, like, you get the blues thing, you get the folk thing, you get the rock thing, and then later on, when they started bringing in the keyboards, that opened up a whole other world, of songwriting, and they started to get into, God forbid, a little bit of the pop sensibility in that regard, right? So there's like a whole massive variety of material that they put out on the records, which is why we're still talking about Zeppelin, all this time later, right? So anyway, that's my number 7. So Martin, what's your number 6?
Okay, my number 6 is Presence. And just to address this idea of production a little bit, I'll agree with you and disagree with you on the production thing, because I think on the subtleties of production, when you move into arrangement, Jimmy's a genius, and you can hear everything. It's not over cluttered. That's one of the big things about it. There's not a lot of layers. It's not over cluttered, and it's pleasing to the ear after many, many listens for that reason. But on the other hand, I've always been of this opinion that the production always sounded, or I don't know what you want to call this. You could call it the engineering. You can call it the mix. I kind of call it the production, because I don't think you're hearing scintillating crisp highs or beautiful analog lows. You're getting a lot of mid-range and distortion. Case in point, play this album against Aerosmith's Sick as a Dog. Listen to that intro to Sick as a Dog with that acoustic over top of those drums and everything. That record sounds like Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon compared to this. It actually looks like Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon compared to this, which brings up another point. I actually did an episode of my podcast, History in 5 Songs, where I talked about white albums that I wasn't that crazy about. And one of them was Aerosmith Draw the Line, and we did Saxon, Strong Arm of the Law, and I can't remember what the other ones are. But so back to this album and production. This is a quintessential Zeppelin production in that I mean, I don't know. When I listen to Achilles' Last Stand, do I think great production? No, I think trashy, mid-rangey. That's what I think about. I think of like a fat ploipy drum sound, but not a fat thudding super low drum sound, right? The cymbals are brash. The guitars are very brash. So it's funny. Zeppelin productions, it's almost like they're obscure. They're made for certain stereos probably, but not other stereos. They're probably made for the radio beautifully, but I don't think the high fidelity is there that you get off of certain other albums in the 70s. Again, Aerosmith rocks against this. This is one of the reasons I kind of put this album down a little bit, is because I think Aerosmith was just kicking their ass by this point. Rocks is just so much more professional sounding an album than this is, right? This is considered a little bit, the creativity is a little bit low on it as well. I mean, here I am putting it 6. I mean, it's not crazy low, and I do like Achilles' Last Stand a lot, but I feel it's a little bit in that forced Aerosmith Kings and Queens thing. I always matched up these albums. I always compared them to Aerosmith at the time for some reason, because as a young kid, Aerosmith's our band. Led Zeppelin is a band of the previous generation a little bit, right? My favorite is Nobody's Fault. Love the album cover and this whole idea of the object. It's supposed to be a negative space when you look at it, and if you do look closely, you can't see the seams in it in the middle, because it's supposed to be a void. It's supposed to be something you look into. And I remember Aubrey Powell told me an interesting story about them fashioning something up for this tour of Japan they did, where they had this thing and you reached into it. It was like an optical illusion, and it was like freaking people out. But yeah, I think it's a great concept and really moody and mystical. But yeah, so just to sum up again, I find this maybe to be their, and we also did an episode of our YouTube show, The Contrarians, where we have a secondary show called Worst Album by a Band. And we talked about this as Zeppelin's worst album. Now, I'm ranking it higher than that because I like it a little more. But in terms of the creativity for the era that it came out in, I think they were starting to be lapped a little bit at this point. This is when other bands were kind of doing things a little bit better. Maybe Blue Oyster Cult Agents of Fortune is a better album, but certainly Aerosmith rocks. I think you can't deny. I mean, Montrose is already out by this point, right? It's 3 years before this. So I don't know. There you go. I probably complained about that album a little more than I should for a 6, but there you go.
But something had to be 6, right? So
it had to be 6.
All right. What do we got, P, for number 6?
All right, I'm going to go with the debut for my number 6. Again, if we go back in our time machine and we go back to late 70s or early 80s, I would have ranked this higher. I just have found, kind of like Martin, I think there's some great blues on here, but maybe a little bit too much. And I think, you have a couple songs on here which I've heard, way too many times. Good Times, Bad Times. Great song. Do I need to hear it again? Not really. Communication Breakdown, I think I've heard way too many times. But, how many more times? I dig quite a bit. I still love Dazed and Confused. I even love Dazed and Confused, the 50-minute version from So Remains the Same, or however long it is. But I think that there's a lot of good variety on here. I think it shows a very hungry, raw band in their infancy, and I like that. And like you, Hack, I dig when Zeppelin plays like the straight heavy blues thing. I think they're really good at that. So, just because it's coming in number 6 doesn't mean I don't like this album a lot, because I actually do. It's a classic. It's one of the best debuts of all time. It's got that iconic album cover, right? And, what's really cool about this, if you're a guitar player, is that, Jimmy Page is getting that monstrous tone on a Telecaster on this album. That's pretty damn cool, I think. So I mean, I love it a lot. I do. It's just, I don't rank it as high as I would have, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever. But I still think it's a really, really important album in rock and roll history and in their discography as well.
Yeah, Telecaster and apparently very small Supro amps too, which is so for my number 6, again, controversial. They're all going to be controversial, but my number 6 is Led Zeppelin 2, and it would have ranked higher again, but I've heard these songs too many times on the radio. Whole Lot of Love, Heartbreaker, great riffs, great songs, but you know, I've heard them too many times. Bring It On Home for me is the star on this record. Absolutely love that riff. The Lemon song, a great jam song. I'm not a fan of jam songs, but that song keeps your interest. And if you're a bass player, that's a textbook in bass playing. That song shows off the amazing playing of John Paul Jones, who's never gets the spotlight. It's all Jimmy Page, but man, John Paul Jones was a beast. Yeah, and again, it's that a great record, but I've heard the songs too many times. But that being said, it's still number 6. So, you know, there's still some really, really good stuff on that. But yeah, that's my number 6, Led Zeppelin 2. All right. Let's move on. So, Martin, what's your number 5?
Okay, my number 5. This flipped with my number 4 a few times, but here we go. In Through the Outdoor. There we go there. And yeah, I love this, you know, this whole idea where with the, remember, if you put water on the inner sleeve, it would change colors. That was the thing about it, right? Aubrey Powell told me this whole thing here. They have no video footage of this whole bar scene that they set up. As soon as they shot these pictures, they just trashed the whole thing. It all went in the dumpster.
Wow.
Pretty nuts. And then obviously it has the paper bag thing to it too. So when this came out in 1979, we were horrified. It was too mellow. We were angry young metalheads. The heavier, the better. Little did we know the new wave of British heavy metal was coming, but there were way too many keyboards and ballads and soft stuff, and Hot Dog was stupid and that. But this is the album besides Coda that I definitely have played the most over the last 15 years. Caras Alhambra is a masterpiece. It's one of my top probably 5 favorite Zeppelin songs of all time. In the Evening is so simple, but still it's so addictive and cool. It's just got a great groove to it. I love the production of this album. This is probably my favorite produced or favorite production on a Zeppelin album. I find, because when I think of production, it might be a simplistic view, but first thing I think of is there enough bass? Is there enough treble? If I don't have to turn everything up full and I'm still unsatisfied, it's fine. And I find this very kind of like full-blooded. It's got good bottom end. I love the fact that John Paul Jones is one of the chief writers and a guy doing a lot of work on this album. But yeah, basically, you know, I find it quite interesting all the way throughout. I'm Gonna Crawl is kind of like cool and dark and moody. Fool in the Rain, I think, is just really fun and really addictive. Southbound Sares, really like that a lot too. So yeah, I have no problem with this album now. You know, like I said, we hated it as kids. It was way too mellow. You know, and I remember, you know, I've often mentioned this, but 1979 was a recessionary year in the record business, and everybody was putting all the hopes of any sort of decent numbers coming in on this, Pink Floyd The Wall, and Eagles The Long Run, and it did sell famously 6 times platinum. At this point, this album is. So there you go, number 6.
You know, and on that record, and I think we talked about this on when we did the Jimmy Page solo show on Jimmy Page solos, Pete. You know, and again, I don't want to harp on the production thing, but you know, Jimmy Page would dial in the worst sounding guitar tone, like a horrible, hideous sound, but within the context of the song,
it worked.
You know, like if there's solos on that record, and I can't, it's escaping me right now, but there's one particular song where the guitar tone is horrible, but within that, it matches beautifully with that solo, with that song. It cuts through, and you know what I mean? It's just that sort of sense of orchestration of sounds. You know, he was a master, an absolute master at that. You know, and it's not just, it's all a lot of his tones, you know, are horrendous on their own, but they work beautifully within the context of the songs. There's tons of examples of that.
Maybe that's what I was getting at, I suppose, right? I mean, I think we're in a little bit of an agreement here. He's such a complex guy, and as a producer, so many people love him, right? And I'm trying to understand. Maybe I don't understand what production is, right?
Well, I'm looking at it as a guitar, and he's playing a lot of Strat on that song, on that record too. That's a lot of Stratocaster on that record.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you got, Pete, for number 5?
All right. So at the top of the hour, I talked about how I flip-flopped a couple albums based on when I did this exercise a year ago. Well, I just made the executive decision. I reversed that. So throw all that out the door. I'm going with my original list here, just because we're talking about all these albums I'm thinking about. I'm like, I'm not going to do it. So my number 5 is going to be Led Zeppelin 2. Again, it's a little bit of fatigue on this album, but this is like their big, powerhouse statement really early on. Not that the first one wasn't, but this has got like all those, big heavy songs that everybody remembers, like, Whole Lotta Love and Heartbreaker. And, but for me, and I think Hack mentioned it, this album for me in the last like 20 years has all been about Bring It On Home, which I think is one of their unsung greatest songs in their catalog. And I like that way more than anything else on this album. I like the opening riffs to Moby Dick, but I would have rather they just fleshed out that whole song. I know they wanted to give Bonham an excuse to do a solo, but I would rather have heard Moby Dick like become like an actual song and not just a drum solo. But it's got all sorts of a lot of weird variety on this album. I tend to not listen to this album that much anymore, but I still appreciate its power and the impact that it's had on rock music over the years. So, I mean, it's number 5. So obviously I do enjoy it, but I think that my favorite stuff on this album today is not like what my favorites were way back when. Although I was listening to a Whole Lotta Love a couple hours ago and I was like, yeah, that's still pretty good. So my number 5.
Cool. So this one hasn't been mentioned yet, but my number 5 is Houses of the Holy. And it is my number 5, despite having one of my favorite Zeppelin songs of all time, which is Dancing Days. Absolutely love that song. I love it. It's an alternate tuning. And this was like the alternate tuning record because he did it on Dancing Days. And he also did it on, was it The Rain Song? I think was the other one. Yeah. Speaking of alternate tunings, Over the Hills and Far Away. That's a song I love. It's one you hear in music shops all over the world. They're not playing the riff to Stairway to Heaven. They're playing Over the Hills and Far Away. Only weak track, which I think is them having a little bit of fun on, is the Crunge. Where's the bridge? Where's that confounded bridge? But you know what? It's that record is really, really cool. I again, getting back to the textbook and all of this, like, the whole alternate tuning thing. I mean, Kashmir, there's all these epic tunes that they were doing using alternate tunings on guitars. And I don't know how many people really doing that around that time. That's another Page genius thing as far as I'm concerned, because it's like when you do an alternate tuning on a guitar, it's a completely different animal, and he was really into that. So, but it probably would have been my number 1 or 2 maybe a couple of years ago. That's how much I love Houses of the Holy. Dancing Days is a fantastic song. It's just every time I hear that riff, oh my God, this is insanely good. Who comes up with this stuff? You know what I mean? Like, great. But anyway, my number 5, Houses of the Holy.
They took a lot of chances on that album. We've got to give them a lot of credit for that.
Yeah.
Okay. My number 4 is, maybe you've heard of this one, Houses of the Holy. Love this record. They got a lot of abuse for this record when it came out. It got some bad reviews. And Pete, you're absolutely right. They took a lot of chances. I find it to be probably their second most creatively daring album. It's very brave. It's got a lot of stuff. Again, Hack, Dancing Days is my favorite song on it too. That riff is amazing.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite and most complex. So I'll get to my favorite Jimmy riff later. But great song with that whole Middle Eastern tone to it and the tonalities that John Paul Jones brings. I love the one attempt at reggae on this. I just did a History in 5 Songs podcast on novelty singles, and I use that to represent when bands try reggae. No Quarter, great doomy song. I would rather they do a long doomy epic, slow epic like this than Dazed and Confused. I just find it to be a really cool tune. The Ocean is just no nonsense, great Led Zeppelin early proto heavy metal. Although again, I mean, I think when Led Zeppelin does heavy metal, there's so many other bands that do it better. It's an okay song. It's not, there are numerous Deep Purple and Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep songs that are better, I think. Song remains the same, super creative, really cool with the slow part and the sped up part. Rain song's good. Over the Hills and Far Away is one of the, this is the first best, super great sounding acoustic guitar thing that he does here, and it's also complicated, and it's really kind of cool with that little extra time signature flip in it, and the crunge I like as well. So essentially, this whole record, I'm quite happy with it. The production, again, it's quintessential sort of, it sounds to me like Led Zeppelin 4 and a little bit like Presence, I would say. In that harshness, it's definitely got a harshness of mid-range to it, but there's so much variety, and yeah, I think it's it's a super progressive album, and it shows them really progressing. So there you go. House of the Holy.
You hear a little bit of the funk in John Bonham's drumming on that record too. Like you mentioned, the crunge and even the ocean.
Yeah.
He's got like that. I mean, we can go do a whole show on John Bonham. I mean, for me, the greatest rock drummer that ever lived. He's got groove in everything he does. Even when he's playing straight rock, it's just there's always that backbeat. He's always a little bit behind the beat, and it just propels everything. And I've read that he was totally into like James Brown and that whole style of drumming, and it comes out in his playing. And you hear it in stuff like The Ocean, and you hear it in stuff like The Crunch, right? Just the guy just lays it down, man. You could pretty much play anything over top of that, and it'll sound glorious. You know what I mean? But anyways, Pete, number 4, what do you got?
All right, so my next two are the Zeppelin albums that have moved the most in my kind of ranking over the last 30 plus years, and specifically this one. So I remember when I was first getting into Zeppelin and I was buying all the albums, and I went and bought this one. And I was like, oh, I love that kind of cool album cover. It's real psychedelic looking, and put it on. And that first track just kind of blows you away. And the next couple are really good. And then all of a sudden you get like all these acoustic songs and you're like, it's like, I'm not really digging this. And because, of course, I was into stuff a lot heavier at the time. And I was like, so I kind of like ignored Led Zeppelin 3 for many years, many, many years. But I have found, like, especially over the last like 15 or so, that I really love this album a lot. And I think it can, I love the acoustic stuff. I think the electric stuff is amazing. I mean, Immigrant Song is legendary, right? Since I've Been Loving You is my favorite of all their bluesy tracks, and I love the guitar solo in it. Friends is a wonderful song. Celebration Day kills. Out on the Tiles is another one of their unsung real happy songs. But then you got Gallows Pole and Tangerine and all the rest of the stuff. It's a really, really engaging album, I think, but it gives you plenty of variety. And it's like you're listening to all the heavy tracks, you're like, all right, that's really good. Then you get these kind of soothing but really fun and kind of galloping acoustic tracks, and it's just a really, really nice listen. And this is kind of like your sit down by the fire and sip your little glass of whatever it is you drink, and the heavy stuff gets out of the way early, and then the rest of it just kind of like, yes, that's something different from them. And you hear Jimmy Page, pretty masterful acoustic guitar player.
Yes,
it really comes through. And I will say Plant also sounds absolutely incredible on this album. It shows like a lot of different textures and styles from him, which I like quite a bit. So yeah, this is the young me. I look back on the young me and I'm like, you didn't know what you were talking about back then, Pardo, when you were 16 years old or whatever. But the older me has grown to really appreciate that album a lot. So that's my number 4.
That's that easy listening Zeppelin that we were talking about earlier.
But in a different way, right? Yeah. But the heavy stuff is really heavy, and then they do this other side to their playing, and at the time, and fans were like, if you look back on the history of Zeppelin and all these albums, like fans were like kind of confused when this came out. They're like, what is this? Like, acoustic songs, these folk songs. That's not the Zeppelin I want to hear, but pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, Out on the Tiles. That's a great song. I love that song. Yeah. So my number 4 is I think their most underrated record, and that's Presence. It's got for me one of their best blues. Again, I'm a sucker for them playing straight blues, and T for One. Oh my God, holy shit! Just, wow, yeah, that's just off the charts. Nobody's fault but mine. Of course, Achilles' Last Stand, is epic. This is, I don't know, for whatever reason, this is like the forgotten gem kind of in their catalog. For Your Life is another great song. I mean, it's what I really like about this song, getting back to what I was saying about the arrangements and all of that. Like, there is musically, there's so much going on, and the compositions of these songs, not to mention the performance and everything else. It's stellar, man. It's stellar. It's like any other band, this would be their masterpiece. For Zeppelin, that's just another record. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Presence. And here's the other thing too. There's no ear fatigue because it never gets played on the radio. You never hear Presence. So when I'm listening to Presence, I'm listening to it for the first time. You know what I mean? And it's like, wow. Yeah. Presence for me, number 4. Love that record. Love it.
Cool.
Okay.
We're
down on the final 3.
Yes. So number 3, this is where I make my stand and say that, I could have rated a few things higher if I really went for that whole I am sick of these songs situation. But I almost put my whole I'm going to put that aside thing and focus the whole thing into here, because obviously I had Zeppelin 1 and Zeppelin 2 really low. I had them at my bottom, right? But I really couldn't do that to this record. Because Rock and Roll is an amazing song. It's really, the energy on that is just seething. The way that drum riff comes in that you never can quite figure out. And speaking of weird drum riffs, I mean, the way Black Dog kind of reverses and mirrors itself as you go through the whole thing. Amazing. And a great metal song in the way that it sounds like a fast song, but it's actually a slow song. Misty Mountain Hop with that cool arrangement and that sort of like ethereal hippie vibe to what Robert's doing on it. Battle of Evermore with Sandy Denny, right? It's Sandy on there with that great co-male and female vocal. I think it's one of their cool, moody, mystical acoustic ones, and it's got like a good tension to it. I was never a big Stairway to Heaven fan. I always found all of those parts kind of pedestrian. I was just never a big fan of that song, but it's okay. It's there. But I'm fine with 4 Sticks. Going to California is probably way up there as like with Over the Hills and Far Away, which is kind of half heavy and mellow. But Going to California is probably my number 1 favorite acoustic song of theirs. And When the Levee Breaks is fine too. So I really have no problem with this album. I mean, this is the one that 23 times platinum in the States. November 71. So, by 71, this is the other great thing about Zeppelin. I mean, as much as I rave about Sabbath and Deep Purple and Uriah Heep as reinventing heavy metal, well, the fact of the matter is Zeppelin had 4 records out by 1971, which is pretty cool. So yeah, great album, a lot of variety on it. It's just all of it is strong, and I just I refused to go down the road for at least this one. And, you got to put it high. I just thought I better be responsible with one of my rankings here.
Voice of reason.
I mean, I'm with Martin on that. I totally get that. And then let's not sugarcoat it. By 1971, they've sold a shitload of records.
Yeah.
A lot. I think people forget just how many albums this band sold over the years.
Yeah.
A ton.
That's crazy.
All right, my number 3 is this bad boy right here, Houses of the Holy. I always thought this was a rather intriguing album cover too, right? I love the colors, and I mean, I remember once I was contemplating buying a House of the Holy shirt, like, I don't know, a decade ago or so, and my wife, and I was, had it on my screen, and my wife's like, "Why are you going to buy a T-shirt with naked little children on it?" And I looked at her, and I'm like, yeah, you don't get it. It has nothing to do with the little children. It's Zeppelin. I mean, come on, right? But a lot of great songs on here. And I was just listening to this yesterday, and it just, this is one of those albums that I like more and more as the years go on. I mean, you guys mentioned all the great stuff on here. A Song Remains the Same is a terrific song. The Rain song is pretty damn magical.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, those guitar textures, the mellotron. I mean, Plant's just like yearning vocals, absolutely amazing. Over the Hills and Far Away, really tricky, great rock song. The Crunge is fun. Dancing Days is awesome, great riff in there. Jamaica is hilarious, right? But it's kind of fun too. I love No Quarter. I love the doominess of that song. I like it even better on the Song Remains the Same live album. And I think The Ocean is a pretty cool heavy rock song from them. Again, not their best heavy rock song, but kind of a cool way to end the album. And I find this album really without fault, and I love the variety on it. So it's really climbed up quite high for me in recent years. That's my number 3.
Yeah, that would have ranked higher for me a few years ago, guys. I'm a big fan of that record. Always love that record. Okay, so we're at number 3. So my number 3 is Physical Graffiti. It's got the big thing for this record is it's got a ton of variety on it. I mean, you've got the slower tunes, the more ballady stuff. You've got a lot of experimentation going on. You've got the introduction of keyboards going on. It's just a great variety of material. And this is home of the absolute masterpiece. This is home of Kashmir. So that alone is enough to rank this pretty high. A lot of great songs, the Rover, Wonton song. These are songs that do not get played to death, thank God. 10 Years Gone, Boogie with Stu is a lot of fun. All amazing songs. The experimentation, there was a lot of sort of all their influences coming into this. You've got rock, you've got blues, there's a little bit of a rockabilly. Again, I mentioned the keyboards coming in, Trampled Underfoot. I mean, there's just so many fantastic songs on this record. If somebody had never heard of Led Zeppelin and I'd say, what record would you suggest? I would give them Physical Graffiti, because that's got everything in that one record. It's the embodiment of the band. And amazing playing. My God, Jimmy Page, some of my favorite guitar solos are on this record. And it's incredible. It's an incredible record, Physical Graffiti. And that's my number 3.
Cool. All right. Okay, so my number 2, this is for years and years and years, has always been my number 2. It's never been dislodged for any reason. Led Zeppelin 3. I love the whole idea of, okay, well, let's talk about the heavier side first of all. Immigrant Song, big fan of Immigrant Song, but Friends is a mellow one. But it's in my top 5 or 6 Zeppelin songs. It's so haunting and strange. It's mellow and acoustic, but it sounds really devilish, right? It sounds like Jimmy Page and Kenneth Anger getting together sort of thing. It's really like, wow, this is coming from a strange place. And Celebration Day is my favorite riff of Jimmy's in terms of being a cerebral riff. That whole it's just this cool, complicated riff. And I always liken it to my favorite Aerosmith song of all time, which is Draw the Line, which has a similar riff that kind of meanders and goes on and on. So it's the same sort of thing, right? So I love Celebration Day because it's just really cerebral and really cool. And another cerebral heavy one on there is Out on the Tiles, which has kind of like a cool rhythmic counterpoint to it. Gallows Pole's great, even though it's kind of a traditional. I always knock those down a little bit of a notch. I think Tangerine's just a beautiful, mellow song, and it's well put together. It's one with that seems like it has a little bit of architecture and execution to it. So yeah, I just love the bravery of all this acoustic stuff on here. It did surprise a lot of people and tick a lot of people off, but that first side really gets me. I'm fine with Hats Off to Harper. Bronyar Stomp, That's the Way is also like a little bit dark and moody and acoustic. So I mean, it sounds like them sitting again, like sitting on a hillside in Wales by a cottage and the storm rolling in, that kind of acoustic stuff. And like I say, really anchoring this record for me is Friends and Celebration Day. So there you go, number 2.
Yeah, talking about guitar orchestration, I mean, Tangerine, listen to the guitars on that. Just amazing. Just amazing.
I'd argue that side 1 of Led Zeppelin 3 is one of their best album sides. in their whole catalog. And if it's not the best, it's definitely 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, my number 2, I'm going to go with the 4th album. Hack, I see your point about, the overexposure of this album. And I wanted to knock it down because of that, but ultimately I really couldn't. Despite the fact that I never need to hear Rock and Roll Again. I'm really sick of that song. It is a great song. I just never need to hear it again. Stairway to Heaven, I can probably hear that once a year and I'm okay with it. Other than that, it's too much because I've heard it too much. But I still adore Black Dog. And I just did a show on Sea of Tranquility this past week where we were talking about some of our favorite songs to listen to while driving in the car. I still get pretty jacked when I'm listening to Black Dog in the car. I think it's just a great driving song. Battle of Evermore is one of their more acoustic, kind of mystical songs that I have learned to love more and more as time has gone on. I think that's a really magical track. Misty Mountain Hop is great. I dig Four Sticks. I think that's a pretty good hard rocker. When the Levee Breaks is big and epic and bluesy. I love that. I will say I'm not, and I know Martin says he loves it. I have never been a Going to California fan at all. And I've always just bypassed that track. But, you can't love everything, right? But the rest of this album, there's some just absolute Zeppelin classics on here that I still really, really enjoy quite a bit. And I think this is like one of those iconic albums in rock and roll history, right? Not just because of the weird, spooky, guy on the front with the sticks on his back, right? But it's just this whole album is just shrouded in this like wonderful mystery, right? From the music to the design to everything, it's a great album, and I had to put it up pretty high.
Cool. Well, my number 2, you guys ranked a lot lower. This is what we call, I guess, the easy listening Led Zeppelin. But I absolutely love In Through the Outdoor, man. I just love that record. The drums on Fool in the Rain. I mean, Bonzo, the guy, that is, and you're a drummer, Martin, so you could attest to this. That is a textbook in drumming right there. I mean, all those ghost notes that just amazing pattern. Bonzo had a way, like if you took the Zeppelin catalog, okay, and you stuck any other drummer in that slot, those songs would come down like 4 or 5 notches. He just always played the perfect beat, the perfect pattern, the perfect groove. He just elevated that song, which goes back to what we started about having, when we started the discussion, having 4 master musicians. The same could be said about John Paul Jones. I mean, those guys took the material and they played it as best as it could possibly be played. The musicianship is off the charts with this band, and that's just an example of one of them. I love the keyboards, and I am not a fan of keyboards. Okay. I can't stand keyboards in a band, but these guys, the way they put the keyboards in, here's where I don't like keyboards in a band, where a keyboard is basically just playing with the guitar players playing the riff with the guitar player. It just sounds wimpy. It just dilutes the power of the guitar. But when you're playing a keyboard part and then the guitar player is playing something else and then they're meshing and accenting each other, and there's tons of examples of that on this record. I know that Page was going through his, bad time, but the guitar parts that he was playing on this record mesh so beautifully with the keyboard parts. And it's just, again, it goes back to that whole idea what I was saying before about the arrangement of the songs and some of the sounds he was using. But man, it's gorgeous. The soundscapes that they created on this album are to die for. Absolutely love it. Some of the stuff just sounds so grandiose, and it's just knowing how to play that keyboard and how to play those parts and have them come together. You mentioned Hot Dog. Hot Dog, I think, is just a lot of fun. It's a fun song. Carousel Alhambra. I mean, that when the guitar comes in on that song, oh, that is epic. The ground is shaking, man. Like, come on. I love it. Absolutely love it. I can't say enough about this record. Love the keyboard parts. You mentioned All My Love, Pete. That, for me, is one of the greatest songs ever written. Fantastic song. It's just that record for me, I could listen to that record cover to cover and never tire of it. Thank God it didn't get played to death on the radio, so I can still enjoy it. Absolutely love In Through the Outdoor. That's my number 2.
Well, you mentioned All of My Love, and that showed that Mr. Plant could do the more crooning style, vocal style, which, as we have seen throughout his solo career, he's done quite a bit, right? So,
yeah. The way you described the production and the soundscapes, you used the word soundscapes. That's the brilliance of that record. It's the best sounding Led Zeppelin album, in my opinion. I could just listen to it just for the sonics alone, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank John Paul Jones for that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you hear this. I mean, he started doing. You heard a little bit of the more keyboardy stuff on Physical Graffiti. You almost wish after hearing this that had an opportunity to do more of that, you know. Yeah. But that was their last record, right? So, but I would have loved to hear more from John Paul Jones, because if that is any indication of what he was capable of doing in that context of Led Zeppelin, I would have loved to heard more of it. But, you know, on and past. So there you go. But anyway, that's my number 2.
Okay.
All right, we're down to the top records.
Yes. No, hang on. I got to flip this around here. This was not in the right way. We got to do this all its glory. So Physical Graffiti. I have often called this, more than anything, my favorite album of all time by anybody. I've called Black Sabbath Sabotage that, and Queen One, and various other things here and there. And Pete, I went on your show and told you that Principle of Moments.
I was just going to bring that up, Martin.
Absolutely. But far and away, this is the record I mentioned the most as my favorite album of all time. I've described this album as the aircraft carrier of all albums, because to me, it just looks like a big, massive U.S. aircraft carrier just pounding through the waves, full of planes coming on, planes going off. That's what this record sounds like to me. It's just a juggernaut record. It's for the production, it's one of these that has kind of this tight, no nonsense, punky sort of mid-range feel, but it's not super distorted and it's never loose. It's not a loose record. I just love that it's got this sort of tension to it. You know, and I look at the songs on here. I have often called In My Time of Dying my favorite Led Zeppelin song of all time, all 11 minutes of it. Great drumming in there, some crazy beats from Bonzo, and some neat, you know, bass drum work on that. But and The Rovers, one of my favorite heavy Led Zeppelin songs. Custard Pie is so much fun. Houses of the Holy is just like gorgeous, hard rocky, poppy. Reminds me a little bit of Dancing Days. You know, this album had songs that were brought forward through time. I don't care about any of that. I think it all hangs together really well. I have no problem with. I think, you know, Ron Nevison and the various people that worked on this kind of got it to sound uniform. Obviously, Jimmy Page has a lot to do with that. But, you know, as kids growing up, I don't remember ever maybe not even knowing that. And it certainly just feels like one sound throughout the whole record to me. I don't see any inconsistency at all. Kashmir is amazing with the, you know, that's the song that's mentioned with the whole Middle Eastern tones. In the Light I Love, 10 Years Gone, like this mellow side that they got here, side 3, Down by the Seaside, with that cool little shuffle that Bonham does on that. And then you get to the end, and Night Flight, great song, Wanton song, the predecessor to Lady of the Lake, right on the Rainbow album, and then on Black Sabbath Dehumanizer, there's one on there. Can't remember what it's called at the moment, but and then, you know, Boogie with Stu's fine. Sick Again, another heavy one. Yeah. So to me, in a way, it's the heaviest Zeppelin album. I think it's the one with the best riffs on it. Even if there are heavier things like Rock and Roll is really heavy in a certain way, this is the one that has the really cool, complicated heavy metal riffs on it. So yeah, just start to finish. I've always been a sucker for double albums, but this one is, and it's just so much variety. It never lets up. It's always surprising you, whether it's the mellow stuff or the heavy stuff or the clavinet or Trampled Underfoot or whatever. Just great performances throughout. So yeah, literally more than any album, I have called this my favorite album of all time by anybody. So it's got to be my number 1. There you go.
And it being a double album, it's all killer and no filler.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, a double album, but where like all the songs. I mean, of course, there's better songs than others, but there's nothing on there you can say this is a complete dud. You know what I mean? They weren't filling any time there. They're all good songs on there. So yeah, great record. Number one, Pete. What do you got?
It's my number one as well.
Right.
So Martin has basically said just about everything I was going to say. We talk about all killer, no filler. I've talked to plenty of people in my life who find this album overblown and have way too much filler, and people who harp on the fact that they were using material that was, leftovers from other albums and everything like that. I mean, who cares?
Yeah,
it sounds like a uniform double album. It's like Martin. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. It's probably, if not my favorite, it's in my top 3 favorite double albums of all time. It's got some of their heaviest material on it. It's got some really great blues stuff. It's got some folky stuff, some pop stuff. I mean, it's got a handful of classic songs. My favorite Zeppelin song of all time is The Rover. That's on here. Custard Pie, Trampled Underfoot, Cashmere. I mean, the Wanton song. I mean, so many great, great songs are on here. So many charming songs are on here. This is the Zeppelin album that I point someone to who doesn't know anything about Zeppelin, because I think this has everything that made them great is represented on this album. Yeah. And it's an amazing, amazing record. And for me, their crowning achievement, as much as I love a lot of these other albums, this sits way up here. And, my number 2 is kind of down here a little bit. It's just a remarkable, remarkable album.
Yeah. On the subject of filler, I mean, the only things I can look at on here that I would even remotely call filler would be Bron-Y-Aur, which is 2 minutes of instrumental, and maybe Boogie with Stu, and maybe a little bit Black Country Woman. That's it. And they're all short. Like, forget about calling any of these long ones on side 3 filler and anything else. I mean, side 2, forget it, right? Side 1, no way. So I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at what does this add up to here? Well, it's like 7 or 8 or 9 minutes of possibly filler, but it's not filler to me. I don't think there's any filler on it.
No, I agree with you.
I mean, you mentioned the Wonton song, and going back to Bonham's drumming. I mean, come on, the drumming on the Wonton song.
Yeah,
and him always playing a little, like Page plays a riff, and there's a shot just a little bit behind. It's like, oh, then he make that. I mean, it's a great riff, but the groove is insane on that song.
Yeah.
No, I love it.
Amazing is In the Light. I mean, In the Light is one of my happy place songs, right? You feel a little down, put on In the Light, dun 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 dun, and those great vocals from Plant. I mean, it's just like you can't not break out of whatever shell you're in with that, nice long song that's just so uplifting. I just love it.
Yeah. No, yeah. My top 3 are interchangeable, and that was in my top 3. So, and my number 1 and again, they're all interchangeable, but for my number 1 is the first record. So I went with that for my number 1. And, if you listen to that record, I mean, from the records that came after, that was the blueprint. I mean, he had the light and the shade, he had the blues, he had the heavy rock and the communication breakdown. It was sort of a precursor to what was coming. The only thing that wasn't on that record was there was no keyboards, because I came later on as well. But I don't know. I still, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. I've always loved that song. Their cover of that song, because who did that originally? Do you guys know off the top of your head?
Which song?
Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You.
Aren't they Willie Dixon songs? These things?
I don't know. Anyways, and Martin, you were mentioning you weren't a fan of the recording.
Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. Yeah, no, it's just traditional.
Oh, it's a traditional.
Yeah, and Breeden.
Oh yeah, right. And wasn't there which of these has a what's his name in between? Not Bert Jantz, the other guy. There's a bit of a complicated history in there. Yeah. No, the two blues on here are the Willie Dixons, right? You shook me, and I Can't Quit.
Yeah. And again, I'm a sucker for when they do the straight ahead blues, and that's on there. I think that I love the recording of it. You could tell that there's, a lot of the song, Good Times, Bad Times, Communicate. There's a ton of energy on that. You could see that they were hungry. You could tell, that Page had a plan. you know, for what it was coming, and he had the musicians to execute it. And you could hear it, the synchronicity between the guys on that record, and that comes through in the recording. And that record was sort of a textbook of what they were about to do, and it's a textbook for all future bands from that point on, if you will, they created any kind of rock in the 70s and 80s. So I always got a warm spot for that first record. It's just, the riffs are great, the playing is great, the vocals, I mean, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, like, you talking about crooning, I mean, yeah, it's just sort of like a nugget of what's to come in the future for Zeppelin. And of course, they carried it out in spades. So there you go.
Yeah. I will say a little side note to that. If you listen to any of the kind of bootleg live recordings from like those first two tours, like the first two albums, man, were they a force. I mean, they were always, you know, you could say a force to be reckoned with live, although a lot of people say they were kind of sloppy at different points in their career. But man, those first couple tours, woo, that's a hungry band looking to take over the world. I'm telling you, like in 69 and 70 out on the road.
I remember hearing a bootleg of, I can't remember what song it was. And man, Plant's voice could shatter glass. He had so much power, and he could just hit those notes like crazy. I mean, it was, you know, and yeah, he was, you could tell over the years, but in the beginning, man, that guy was a jet engine, you know.
He was. I just got a hold of a bootleg from an old Fillmore West show from like, I think it's 1969. Oh my God. I mean, Plant sounds ferocious, and the band is just jamming up a storm. I know some people don't like the more jammy stuff, but and they were playing some stuff in their set list that just like never made it to any of their studio albums. Really, really interesting stuff, and really heavy. I mean, they were really heavy live back on those first couple tours.
Yeah. So there you go, folks. Those are our, I was going to say top 10, but there's only 9 of them. Those are our 9 ranking. Hopefully you guys in the chat, we're at 117 people here right now. So I'll keep an eye out in the chat. If anyone's got any questions or comments, let me know. In the meantime, I want to mention Martin wrote that book on Zeppelin, and if anyone is interested in that book or any other books that Martin has written, I have his website address below as well. Pete Pardo, most of you are here probably be from Pete's channel, Sea of Tranquility. I have his YouTube channel below if you're not already subscribed to Pete Pardo. And if you want to help the Hack channel, below there's please like and subscribe first off if you like this type of content. And I have these gentlemen on every like 6 weeks or so. We'll talk, have some debates about music, so please like and subscribe. And also, if you're interested in some merch, it's down there as well as my email, my Facebook, my Guitar Hack channel, and PayPal and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm just, people are talking about we mentioned that at the top of the show. Tim Bogart, somebody was mentioning that he passed away earlier today.
Everybody go out and listen to your old Vanilla Fudge, Cactus, and Beck, Bogart, and a Peace albums in memory of Tim. Great bass player.
Yeah, well, that Cactus stuff is really good. Yeah. Somebody turned me on a Cactus, because Cactus totally like off my radar. And then someone who said to me, you know, you should listen to this band Cactus. And it's like, oh my God. If you like Mountain, and again, another gentleman, Leslie West, we just lost not too long ago. But if you're into that genre of music, you like Cactus or Mountain, you should check out Cactus. Really, really good stuff. Really good.
3 bands that were called America's Led Zeppelin: Cactus, Mountain, and then Montrose, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, here's a question for Martin. Any Led Zeppelin versus Dark Side of the Moon, sonically, landscape, and production, how do they rate?
Well, it's funny. I mentioned Dark Side of the Moon because I always picked that as the first album that sounded perfect. The first album that had all the frequencies dialed in, where you never reached over to your thing and said, I need more bass, I need more treble, suck some mid-range out of this thing, right? So I always, for whatever reason, think of that album as the first time we reached the limit of perfection. And then everything after Dark Side of the Moon to me feels like choices, right? You want your record to sound like this. I mean, it isn't really that way. I mean, that we hit that again when it comes to computers, right? Because now you really can just make any record sound however you want to make it, right? But no, so I guess to answer the question, there were various things all along. Like I think the Montrose first record sounds better than every Led Zeppelin record. I think certainly Aerosmith Rocks and maybe Toys in the Attic, maybe even Get Your Wings sounds better. I don't know if Black Sabbath really has anything that sounds quote unquote better, but until maybe Technical Ecstasy, but that's only 1976, right? So Deep Purple Machine Head. Great sounding record, you know, a lot of bass, a lot of treble, everything in the right place. So by 1972, better record. Uriah Heep, Look at Yourself, I think is like head and shoulders better sounding than any Led Zeppelin record. So yeah, it's a funny thing. This whole thing being mix, engineer, production, arranging, having too many things in it, having not enough things in it, ear fatigue. All these things can be debated when it comes to Led Zeppelin, but when it comes to just straight pure sonics, I think there are a lot of things that sound better.
So here's a question for for you, Pete. Rick is asking, what songs can Pete play from Led Zeppelin on guitar?
I mean, I don't know. I was never a big sit down and learn Led Zeppelin songs on guitar guy, but I can play some of the Whole Lot of Love and Days of Confused and, a couple other riffs here and there. I can play a little bit of Black Dog. I've more have been, I've always been like a guy to sit down and learn Sabbath and Purple stuff and, that sort of thing. But I never messed around with Zeppelin a hell of a lot on guitar.
Yeah, he's asking me the same question. Well, I know how to play like a bunch of Zeppelin riffs, songs from beginning to end. I don't really know a lot of them, but I can play a ton of Zeppelin riffs. I mean, that's like the first thing you do. You're holding a Les Paul. What else are you going to do? It's like screaming, play Zeppelin on me, But yeah, the Rover. Yeah, I know I can play that riff. Yeah. Guitar, can you have Martin clarify if he thinks the second Plant record is better than all Zeppelin albums except Physical Graffiti?
Yes.
From TK.
No, I love it. I love it to death. I just love the creative bravery. I love the mellowness. I love Big Log and Other Arms as a heavy one, but in the mood, just so well written, so interesting. The production's amazing on it. The drumming is amazing on it. I've always, as soon as that record came out, it was in my top 5 or 6 or 7 for decades after that. So and Pete, when you did that thing with Physical Graffiti's way back here and then a big drop, I kind of feel a little bit that way with Led Zeppelin too. So it's easy to sneak Principle of Moments in there, no problem. Just below.
Isn't it amazing though that folks are remembering like these little side conversations within a bigger conversation from a show we did last week or whatever? I think it's pretty cool, right?
People are typing pictures at 11 is my favorite. People are commenting. Somebody was asking me if I listened to Robert Plant solo stuff. Not really. I mean, the stuff that came out in the 80s I'm familiar with, but when he started doing the collaborations and he started to what's that country artist that he's been doing stuff with?
Alison Krauss.
Alison Krauss. Yeah, I'm not in any. He's that Shapeshifters band or whatever. Yeah, I'm not familiar. Obviously, I'm not familiar with that stuff. So. Yeah. But the earlier stuff, the 80s stuff, I was into that stuff, but I wouldn't call myself an expert on it. CK is also asking if Martin has seen Zeppelin live.
No, because I grew up in a small town in British Columbia and didn't see a lot of concerts as a kid. First one was Ted Nugent, Rex, Bebop Deluxe. So I saw Robert Plant on Principle of Moments. I saw Paige Plant in Toronto on Walking into Clarksdale, which I love. I've seen Jason Bonham do a drum clinic. What else? I've seen John Paul Jones live supporting King Crimson at the beautiful Massey Hall here in Toronto. He did an amazing, amazing show leading this band, singing and playing mandolin and stuff like that, right? So if you put all the parts together, I almost was there.
Uh,
I will say, if anybody gets a chance to see Jason Bonham's Led Zeppelin Experience, very good. I've seen them a couple times. That's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Jamie Laszlo is saying, I listened to Page's Outrider last week for the first time, wasn't feeling it. We were talked about, I did a show, oh man, it's a while, like over a month ago, Pete, on your channel. We talked about, we did rank Jimmy Page's guitar solos, and I think I picked one or two from the Outrider record. That is a fantastic Jimmy Page solo record. If anyone is interested in a Zeppelin-y sounding Jimmy Page solo record, a lot of guest vocalists on it, but the riffs were to die for on that album. Okay. All right, folks. I want to thank everyone for watching the show. You guys absolutely rock. Next week on the show, I will have Randy Crook. Randy Crook. Oh my God. Randy Cook. What was I thinking? Randy Cook is coming on the show next week. He is in both Gene Simmons and Ace Frehley's solo band. He will be on the show next week talking to us about working with them, and he's got some solo projects that are out right now. So we'll be talking to Randy next week. I want to thank both these gentlemen again for coming on the show. It's always awesome when you guys are on. I don't know about you guys, but I always have a ton of fun when you guys are on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so Martin, is anything you wanted to mention before we sign off here? Anything upcoming?
No, particularly. Well, I'm just finishing up a Sweet book. Was proofing that today. The Angel book, I had just had that out. That went out of print. But yeah, anything I have in print is at martinpopoff.com.
And the link is below. What about yourself, Pete?
Well, visit us over on Sea of Tranquility here on YouTube. I also have a second channel for all you comic book fans called Comic Book Geezers. A pretty cool, notable show coming up this Friday morning. Martin and I are going to rank the albums of the Tubes for anybody who's familiar with that kind of cool and wacky band, the Tubes. That's coming up Friday morning, so check that out.
Cool. All right, folks. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a fantastic week, and we will see you next Wednesday. All right. Cheers, everybody. Take care.